Welcome to History for Granite. Join me to explore ancient Egypt. Together, we'll uncover secrets that only stones from antiquity can reveal. Please subscribe to the channel to get notified when new videos are published, and thank you so much for growing the channel. The Pyramid of Meidum, named only for the geographic region in which it resides, is a challenging structure to understand. Its present appearance is unsettling, as if one is looking at a corpse and attempting an autopsy to determine exactly what went wrong. This monument is also distinctly isolated from other Old Kingdom pyramids, which are clustered together in regions such as Giza, Saqqara, and Abu Sir. The exterior of the pyramid is greatly ruined, and what remains is a confusing core with different strata of construction bands visible in the upper section. To add insult to injury, the Pyramid of Meidum is distinguished as the only completed pyramid that was never claimed by a pharaoh. Or, at the very least, it was not claimed in an official manner that removes doubt about its origins. It can be argued that the pyramid was not 100% completed, but anything left undone would have been a negligible effort for the builders. All of these factors combine to make the Meidum Pyramid an overlooked and somewhat disparaged construction. But despite the destruction inflicted upon this pyramid, there is an enormous amount it can teach us about the methods and purpose for creating what was once the most magnificent building of its time. There's also a great deal of underappreciated mystery about the Meidum Pyramid that Egyptology has failed to address. The first and most pressing question everyone asks is, what on earth happened to cause such complete ruin to the exterior? The most probable cause is that the damage is due to quarrying. The Meidum Pyramid sits particularly close to cultivated land and human habitation. It was an extremely convenient source of stone and was thus quarried far more extensively than the outer Tura casing blocks that are missing from other pyramids. In the 20th century, some scholars argued that the pyramid had collapsed, perhaps even before it was completed. But given the extensive quarrying that has taken place, a more reasonable assumption is that collapse occurred intermittently over time as the pyramid was dismantled and subjected to the weathering forces of nature. An architectural feature of the Meidum Pyramid that perhaps contributed to structural failure is that it began as a stepped pyramid and was later converted into a true pyramid. The stepped pyramid had already received its smooth casing stones, and thus the final pyramid stage could not be bonded properly to the earlier design. But it's important not to make the assumption that this pyramid was a failed construction from the beginning. Another reason presented as a cause for failure is that the expansion of the Meidum Pyramid put the outer layer on a foundation of sand instead of pavement. The old saying, "Don't build your house on a foundation of sand," is catchy and often used as evidence that early pyramid builders made critical mistakes by doing so. But compacted sand can be perfectly capable of supporting heavy loads without slippage. There is no way to know whether or not a foundation of sand would be problematic without testing, and this science has not taken place at the pyramid. And importantly, the outer section of the pyramid that sits upon sand would carry the lightest load. Before digging in further, I want to thank researcher Keith Hamilton for his wonderful guide to the Meidum Pyramid located on academia.edu. A link is in the description. We'll be analyzing some of his ideas and using some of his diagrams to help us understand this pyramid. Thanks also to the ISITA project for use of their wonderful photographs so that we can examine the evidence for ourselves. Their website is linked in the description, and please go check out all of their amazing photo albums. I'd like to begin our study of the Meidum Pyramid with an appreciation of Flinders Petrie, who has the distinction of discovering the small temple attached to the eastern side. This unassuming stone structure is the oldest building in existence which has survived completely intact. The contrast between the condition of the temple and the condition of the pyramid is profound, and it's only because the temple was so deeply buried in debris that it escaped the greed of man. Digging it out was an enormous accomplishment, and tales of this type of work are some of my favorite stories in the historical record. Here are a few passages from Petrie in 1892 about this excavation. Quote, "At last we reached the bottom, and there found the sloping casing of the pyramid, and a wall at right angles to it, and the great stela, our whole was a success. We had on each side an imminent wall of loose rubbish. On the west it was as high as a London house, sand and chips and big blocks, all sloping in stratification so as to slide off into our hole from a height of 40 or 50 feet. I gave a moderate slope to this face, about 1 in 4, which sufficed to hold it up so long as the weather was tranquil. But soon a raging gale arose. I was in the pit some time that day, and shall never forget the horrid confusion. The air was so full of whirling sand that one's eyes had to be kept longer shut than open. And as the sand was blown out from the face of the work, the stones came rattling down in avalanches." End quote. It took Petrie's team another 3 weeks to clear out the fallen rubble, just to arrive at the depth they had reached when the storm struck. After this enormous amount of work at his own expense, Petrie then did something quite remarkable, which was not a common practice of his time. He writes, quote, "I measured it all completely, photographed it, drew it, copied all the inscriptions, and then reburied it as thoroughly as could be desired. To have left it open would have been to ensure its destruction in 6 months. The Pyramid of Meidum is the quarry of all the neighborhood. It is only the vast mass of the pyramid that has saved the tombs of Meidum from utter ruin." End quote. But in spite of this heroic and successful preservation job done by Petrie, I can't help but think Egyptology is squandering an opportunity here. The 2 large stelae were uninscribed, a fascinating mystery that has caused ownership of the Meidum Pyramid to be questionable. I would suggest that modern radiography techniques might reveal clues about them that are hidden to the naked eye. Perhaps these stelae were originally painted, or had the intended inscriptions sketched out in some way. A closer look is warranted, but their present exposure to the sun surely reduces the chance of finding such clues. When it comes to understanding the composition of the pyramid structure itself, once again we must rely upon late 19th and early 20th century archaeology. In about 1912, Gerald Wainwright, who worked with and studied under Flinders Petrie, excavated a tunnel under the pyramid to understand its interior design. He discovered that the Meidum Pyramid was built in layers of accretion, with relatively even intervals of smooth blocks extending outward from a central core. These layers were then bonded together horizontally at a level that would become the top of each step for a stepped pyramid. In 1928, Egyptologist Ludwig Borchardt would expand upon Wainwright's discoveries with analysis that determined the Meidum Pyramid was constructed in 3 distinct stages. The first stage, named E1, consisted of a stepped pyramid 7 courses high. The next stage, E2, slightly expanded the pyramid to 8 courses in height. And finally, stage E3 transformed the stepped pyramid into a true angular pyramid of about 52.6 degrees, which is less than 1 degree different from the Great Pyramid at Giza. The final height of the Meidum Pyramid can be calculated as about 94 meters. The stepped pyramid stages E1 and E2 are very similar in their construction. It's likely stage E2 was built shortly after E1 was completed. They both follow the inclination design of Djoser's step pyramid, with the blocks leaning inward to form a 75-degree angle. The final smooth pyramid stage, E3, however, was made from flat, horizontal courses with larger and finer blocks of limestone. 3 separate building stages bring important questions about how a ramp system might have been designed. An external spiral ramp seems prohibitively labor-intensive because it would have to be entirely rebuilt each time the Meidum Pyramid was expanded. Flinders Petrie did find the remains of what is likely a straight, original construction ramp on the eastern side of the pyramid during his excavations. This ramp aligns directly with 2 noticeable indentations on the exposed core of the pyramid. As for the exposed core itself, the smooth sections are what remains of the outer faces of the earlier stepped pyramid. The upper smooth faces are from stage E2, and the lowest smooth face is from the smaller E1 stepped pyramid. The rough bands are where the pyramid steps were bonded to the inner accretion layer behind them. The rounded cavities found within the exposed core are separate and more recent excavations. Their purpose is to encourage bats and birds to inhabit those spaces so that their droppings can be collected for fertilizer for the nearby farmland. A close look shows the inclined pathway farmers would climb to reach those alcoves. It's a lot of visual information to take in, but once you get familiar with its main features, the Meidum Pyramid isn't quite as intimidating to look at. All of the quarrying and destruction in the upper 2/3 of the pyramid has created an enormous pile of limestone chips that currently cover what remains of the angular E3 pyramid at the bottom. The E3 casing stones are greatly weathered in many places, suggesting they remained unburied for a very long time. The present view of Egyptology is that the E3 building stage of the Meidum Pyramid came after Pharaoh Snefru constructed the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid in Dashur. The main evidence cited is the quality and flat orientation of the casing stones, as well as masons' marks for the pharaoh's reign, which are similar to those found on the Dashur pyramids. For a while, it was believed Pharaoh Snefru may not have been responsible for the E1 and E2 stepped pyramids, but there is no archaeological evidence for any other pharaoh around the Meidum Pyramid. Building a stepped pyramid twice, then completing 2 larger angular pyramids, only to return and transform the stepped one into an angular pyramid as well, is a strange sequence of events. The institutional narrative of a pharaoh simply trying to perfect a tomb design is not compatible with the E3 building stage at Meidum. We will analyze that in greater detail in a future video. The entrance to the pyramid is centered on the north side, about 18 meters in elevation from the base. This puts it fairly high up, comparable to the Great Pyramid's entrance, which was about 1 meter lower. However, the original E1 stepped pyramid would have had the entrance only 12 meters above ground, which is approximately equal to the Bent Pyramid's lower entrance. We are fortunate the original casing stones remain intact surrounding the pyramid entrance so that we can better understand the original design. Some Egyptologists have made quite a fuss about the layout of these stones, insisting they are proof the entrance was designed to be concealed. I have often mentioned I don't think Old Kingdom pyramid entrances were camouflaged, or at least not for the purpose of keeping the location a secret. I admit one could interpret the Meidum entrance as attempting to hide its location, but the choices could have easily been made for aesthetic reasons as well. The evidence is that the entrance is 3 courses of masonry tall, with the center course cut to receive a block that would be wider than the other 2. Also, the entrance contains a floor joint in the center. These features would make the entrance harder to spot if it was properly plugged, but they also could have been done to keep a consistent aesthetic of staggered casing stones that exist everywhere else on the pyramid. By placing the entrance centered on the north side with a large, structurally unnecessary lintel above it, there wasn't a serious effort to keep this location secret. It looks as if the lintel above the entrance has a joint, but I believe it is instead a stress fracture. Had it been an original feature, one could make a stronger case for camouflage. Entering the descending corridor, it is noticeably taller than every other Old Kingdom pyramid access. A little over 1.6 meters high, most people can walk relatively upright through it. Other pyramids have corridors about half a meter shorter, requiring an awkward squat to navigate through. Interestingly, the Meidum descending corridor is narrower than other pyramid corridors, with about 85 centimeters of width. Subsequent pyramid passages are standardized 20 centimeters wider. These dimensions make for comfortable, human-sized access to the Meidum Pyramid's chambers. Less than 10 meters down the corridor, the E3 pyramid casing ends and we arrive at the E2 stepped pyramid entrance. 2 pairs of D-shaped holes are in the walls, just beyond the threshold, and extra space is left in the ceiling above them. This is the same design that we find in the Bent Pyramid at its entrances, and in the corridors where the pyramid was expanded outward. A comparison of the two makes a strong case that the ceiling gaps were designed to accommodate movable doors. The Meidum ceiling gap is notably longer than the Bent Pyramid ceiling gap. Both gap lengths correlate to 76% of their respective corridor heights, and so a relationship between the two is very clear. It's interesting that the masonry at the face of the E2 stepped pyramid returns to 3 courses tall for the passage. This is also true for the E1 stepped pyramid, according to diagrams from Maragioglio and Rinaldi, so there is a repeating design pattern. I'm very curious if the middle course of masonry at the E2 stepped pyramid entrance was originally offset, just like we see at the current E3 pyramid entrance. If this was the case, then these blocks here would have been thin filler pieces to accommodate the gap and keep the walls of the passage smooth. The block on the east has broken away somewhat, so that this determination could be made with a closer inspection. Even with pretty good photographs, I can't quite tell if the missing section was part of the block behind it or a separate filler piece. There's been so much sloppy restoration in these pyramids that you have to be very careful when evaluating unusual-looking stonework. If the middle course of masonry was always vertically aligned with the courses above and below here at the E2 entrance, then we can be confident this entrance was never intended to be camouflaged. This would indicate that the E3 entrance design was for aesthetics and not secrecy. Below the E2 casing stones, the masonry is of lower quality and has greatly deteriorated. The Meidum Pyramid, being close to cultivated land, sits above a higher water table than most other pyramids. Consequently, the combination of increased moisture and salt has caused the limestone to exfoliate on every surface below this point. This damage makes inspecting the inner E1 pyramid entrance extremely difficult, and I don't have any clear photos of it to show. The descending corridor penetrates about 8 meters below ground at the bottom. Right before the corridor ends, there is a 3-meter deep vertical shaft that penetrates the bedrock, as well as a 14-centimeter groove running along the walls, floor, and ceiling. Researcher Keith Hamilton proposes the vertical shaft was a soak pit for runoff and the groove once held a wooden doorway. These are both reasonable ideas, and they suggest the passage was left open for a long time, either during construction or perhaps afterwards. The bottom of the descending passage immediately opens to a small room, 2.5 meters long and a little over 2 meters wide toward the east. A nearly identical small room follows, but this one towards the west. The poor condition of the limestone walls gives the space an unimpressive appearance. But looks can be deceiving for 4,500-year-old chambers, and these rooms have a key quality that was overlooked by every explorer until the 21st century. The ceilings are flat and spanned with single beams. The beams, despite having flaked off a great deal, are not fractured from stress. Architect-researcher Gilles Dormian was the first person to understand this key observation and quickly determined there was no way the ceilings could withstand the weight of the pyramid. In the year 2000, Dormian and Jean-Yves Verdhert published their findings that the Meidum Pyramid contains corbelled weight-relieving chambers above these 2 rooms, as well as the lower section of the descending corridor. They were able to verify this research by drilling small boreholes in various places to insert an endoscopic camera and visually confirm the hidden corbelled space. Notably, the condition of the sealed corbelled spaces is quite pristine, and it proves the Meidum Pyramid chambers were once nicely finished as well. The present poor condition of the chambers has led some Egyptologists to assert the pyramid was unfinished, but perhaps it is all due to damage inflicted upon the pyramid from later times. A short passage continues south from the 2 chambers and then opens to a tall vertical shaft that is quite unique. The rough condition of the shaft makes it difficult to measure, but it's about a square meter in size, so a bit smaller than the descending corridor. The shaft is about 6.5 meters tall and was probably once tiled with thin limestone slabs. A little over halfway up the shaft, 3 original wooden logs are embedded into the bedrock walls. The lower 2 logs are also supported from below by vertical blocks of masonry. On the northern wall of the shaft, 2 vertical semicircular grooves can still be seen. The grooves terminate at the top where a small opening once concealed access to the relieving space above the short corridor below. And at the very top of the corbelled access in the northern wall remains additional wooden beams embedded into the masonry. Let's quickly finish our pyramid tour and then discuss these features in greater detail. The vertical shaft opens to a chamber with a corbelled ceiling about 5 meters tall, 6 meters long, and 2.5 meters wide. There are no records of anything notable ever discovered within this chamber. The corbelled walls contain notches for wooden beams, mostly placed above the vertical shaft. A few original cedar logs can still be found within them. Finally, a small excavation was dug into the chamber's southern side, but it stopped as soon as bedrock was discovered behind the limestone wall. So what to make of the pyramid's inner chambers and passages? A key clue is that the Meidum Pyramid's chamber design is extremely similar to the Red Pyramid, with two alternating lower chambers followed by a larger chamber high above them. It's reasonable to assume the Red Pyramid's upper chamber was designed this way to be inaccessible. But the Red Pyramid's 8.5 meters of smooth wall is much more difficult to scale than the Meidum Pyramid's 6.5 meter vertical shaft, which could be climbed without a ladder or additional equipment. Researcher Keith Hamilton proposed a clever solution to this problem, which is that the vertical shaft once held a plugging stone supported by the three wooden beams from below. His idea is the grooves on the northern wall would allow ropes to pass through them and not obstruct the plugging stone as it was hoisted into place. These are similar to the grooves found in the Great Pyramid's portcullis chamber, which were necessary to keep the portcullis stone flush with the wall behind it. After the Meidum Pyramid's vertical plug was raised into place, the wooden logs could be inserted into the walls below it and thus keep it propped up in the shaft. The wooden logs were then given additional support from the masonry below them. And finally, the small wooden structure above the plugging stone would have once protruded above the shaft in order to prevent the plugging stone from being forced upward into the chamber. Using a small wooden beam from above allowed the shaft to be kept clear until it was time to close it, at which point the wood could be cemented into the masonry. This defense is a clever arrangement that could not be thwarted quickly, and I congratulate Hamilton for connecting the physical evidence into a possible solution. The grooves on the northern wall are particularly convincing, because I can't imagine anything other than a plugging stone needing that type of clearance. The Meidum Pyramid corridors are far too narrow for a stone sarcophagus to have passed through them. But more research is needed for this construction, because there are a few details which remain troublesome. The wooden scaffold which would support a plugging stone protrudes into the shaft a very small amount, and only the log on the western side has a missing edge due to damage. Furthermore, the corridor leading to the shaft is measured at 82 centimeters wide, whereas the vertical shaft is measured closer to 1 meter in width. Thus, the plugging stone would need to wait at the bottom of the shaft because it couldn't fit through the passage coming from the lower chambers. Compounding this difficulty, the bottom of the shaft is misaligned with the top by about 30 centimeters. Despite not having an exact model of how the vertical shaft could have been plugged, it's reasonable to interpret the shaft as a barrier for access to the upper chamber. With that basic understanding, I'd like to return our focus to the lower two chambers which were ignored for so long. If you simplify the model for all three pyramids attributed to Snefru, there is an obvious pattern which emerges. There are lower chambers which were accessed from a descending corridor, and there are upper chambers that were made inaccessible via blockage and high access points. It seems logical that the lower chambers were designed to accommodate visitors, because why else would so much effort be made to only restrict access to the upper chamber system? If the builders just wanted to seal the entire pyramid interior with maximum security, they could have plugged up the entire descending corridors and dispensed with all the extra security features for an upper chamber system. Indeed, mastabas from before and after these pyramids had their access entirely plugged up. In that context, the lower two chambers in the Meidum Pyramid become much more interesting. Remember how Gilles Dormian discovered these chambers have corbelled relieving spaces above them? Isn't an important question to ask, why did the builders bother to design these chambers with flat ceilings instead of simply leaving the corbelling visible as it is in the upper chamber? The consensus view of Egyptology is that the innermost chambers of 4th Dynasty pyramids were the burial chambers. Thus, the inner chambers were supposed to be more impressive. But as everyone points out, the corbelling in the Meidum Pyramid upper chamber is asymmetrical and a bit rough. The institutional narrative is that later when Snefru constructed the Red Pyramid, the builders were much more skilled and could thus create tall, perfectly symmetrical corbels. But I don't believe that skill or experience explains the difference between the Meidum Pyramid corbels and the Red Pyramid corbels. Intuitively, if you want the corbels to look impressive, you don't stagger them or construct them carelessly misaligned. I think the corbeling is poor in the Meidum Pyramid chamber because it was never meant to be seen, and that the lower chambers with their flat ceilings were supposed to be the impressive-looking space. Remember, these rooms in the Meidum Pyramid are the first chambers constructed directly underneath a mountain of stone. In modern times, we take it for granted that architecture can withstand such enormous pressure. That's probably why nobody until Gilles Dormian noticed that something wasn't quite right. But for the ancient Egyptians, a flat ceiling directly under the pyramid would be a magical effect. The corbeling was hidden to enhance the experience of a visitor. And of course, there's another very famous pyramid chamber which employs the exact same illusion. The Red Pyramid's chambers are much larger than those in the Meidum Pyramid, and so perhaps it was unfeasible to use beams large enough to create flat ceilings in those spaces. Thus, the visible corbeling in the Red Pyramid was made high and symmetrical so that it would be visually impressive in a different way. Interestingly, while the upper chambers of Snefru's pyramids are always the largest, they aren't necessarily the most visually impressive. In that context, perhaps the Meidum Pyramid wasn't a failed practice pyramid for Snefru, and this is why he brought it to a final glory with a higher quality E3 construction stage. The motivation for converting Meidum from a stepped pyramid into a true pyramid remains a mystery, and an enormous problem for Egyptology's narrative about Snefru's agenda. Perhaps by looking at the Meidum Pyramid with less bias from the destruction it has endured, we can begin to understand what made it so important to Snefru, the most prolific pyramid builder of all time. Thanks to everyone who watched this video to the end. Please subscribe to the channel to see more of this content. Give a like or comment as you see fit. And above all, remember to ask your friends if they take their history for granted.